5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Philando Castile. Does that name ring any bells? If it doesn't, by the end of this video, I hope that it will. And if it already does ring a bell, good, because that ringing is about to get a lot louder. This story began, or ended, depending on your perspective, in 2016. It's 2023, and for 7 years, 7 long years, the name Philando Castile has either been whispered out of my mouth or formed on my conscious brain. And today I finally get to release it, set it free from this world, or rather my world of existence, so that his name may pass on to the thereafter. This is my mini magnum opus. For 7 years, I've contemplated and brainstormed ideas on how to tell his story, and this is what I've created. My name is Moses. This is No Names Media, and together we have become anonymous. Join me as I tell you the story about the murder of Philando Castile.
My son would never jeopardize anyone else's life by trying to pull a gun on an officer and the gun was not fire ready. These are some of the facts that came out in the trial, and I am so very disappointed in the system here in the state of Minnesota, because nowhere in the world do you die from being honest and telling the truth. Now, these are some things that you need to know and recognize. There has always been a systemic problem in the state of Minnesota, and me thinking with my common sense that we would get justice in this case, but nevertheless, it never seems to fail us. The system continues to fail black people, and they will continue to fail you all. Like I said, because this happened with Philando, when they get done with us, they're coming from you, for you, and all your interracial children. Y'all are next, and you'll be standing up here fighting for justice just as well as I am.
On the 6th of July in 2016, exactly at 9:06 p.m., Officer Jeronimo Yanez fired the first of 7 shots into a driver's side window of a white 1997 Oldsmobile. The vehicle carried 3 passengers. 5 of the 7 bullets fired from the officer's service weapon struck the driver, killing him, narrowly missing the female passenger. 27-year-old Diamond Reynolds and their 4-year-old child, Deanna. The victim was 32-year-old Philando Castile. He was pronounced dead at 9:37 p.m. at Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, 31 minutes after being struck by the first of 5 bullets. He was 32 years old and only 10 days shy of his 33rd birthday. Born on July 16, 1983 in St. Louis, Missouri, Philando Castile moved to Minnesota at a young age. Friends and family said Philando was intelligent, funny, and an all-around good, genuine guy who got satisfaction from being a good service to his community, being a man of his word, and being dependable. He graduated from St. Paul Central High School in 2001, and soon after he was hired by the St. Paul Public School District as a cafeteria assistant at both Chelsea Heights Elementary School and Arlington High School. He was prompt, good-natured, and his laid-back personality made the staff and students who interacted with him feel both acknowledged and appreciated.
Mr. Phil, he used to talk a lot, and I used to talk a lot. So one day, Mr. Phil was like, "How was your weekend?" And I was like, "It was good. How about yours?" And then we just had this long conversation, and people were getting so annoyed because we were holding up the lunch line. He loved kids. He used to have secret handshakes with people, and if you didn't have enough on your tray, he would pull out like graham crackers or something, and he did it with his own money.
Mm-hmm.
Today, do you ever think of him?
Yeah, I think of him a lot. And I think about the fact that prior to Mr. Phil's death, there had been a lot of police shootings happening, specifically to young African-American men.
Do you know why they pulled him over?
I believe because one of the lights in this car wasn't working.
And then they shot him?
Well, Mr. Phil told the police, like you're supposed to, that he had a gun on him.
Was he allowed to have a gun?
Yep, he had a permit.
I'm glad that Mr. Phil said that, but I'm sad that Mr. Phil said that.
He was trying to do what the officer said, but the officer decided to pull out his firearm and shoot Mr. Phil.
The officer should have said, "Hand me your gun, I'll give it back to you once I know that you have a permit." Then he should have gave him a ticket, and then they should have been on their ways.
I think you're right.
I remember at one point you brought up if Mr. Phil had skin like me, then he wouldn't have been shot.
You know how everybody at school liked Mr. Phil? And he was a warm presence. Everybody felt good around him.
Yeah?
Is it a weird thought to you to think that outside the school, there are people who would look at him and think that he was scary?
It would just make me feel really sad inside. Mr. Phil was not scary.
Yep.
When you found out the police officer didn't go to jail, were you mad?
Yeah, I was really mad. And I'm still mad. But Mr. Phil paid the ultimate price. And that was really unfair. And hopefully, the world will change.
Yeah.
Having landed 2 great jobs as a young man fresh out of high school, Philando showed that he was driven and motivated to find success. With this achievement, 2002 should have been a standout year in the young life of 19-year-old Philando. However, that joy was short-lived. Having doubled the employment responsibilities, Philando knew it was absolutely necessary to have a car in order to fulfill his personal and professional obligations. Like any young man who sought the finer things in life, but instead 2002 became the year his troubles with law enforcement began, and exactly 14 years later to the month when his life would be ended by law enforcement. Between July 2002 and July 6, 2016, the night of his murder, Philando Castile had been stopped by police approximately 46 times. These stops resulted in 52 charges, 35 convictions, and a total of more than $6,000 in fines. As reported by NPR, all of the stops, only 6 of them were things the police would notice from outside the car, things like speeding or having a broken muffler. Therefore, the other dozens and dozens of times Philando was stopped by police officers, they were likely without justification, and simply the targeting of the black and poor to fulfill the city's ticket quota and the baseless criminal assumptions.
Castile didn't just work with the kids, with the students. He knew their names, knew things about them. Tell us a little bit more about his interactions with the children there. What kind of person was he?
Mr. Phil was just gentle, laid back, fun, sweetheart. Kids knew that with him, they would have everything they needed when they needed it. They could go to him for almost anything. And that's a male role model for them that can never be replaced. We're just devastated. You know, this was a person who was our friend, our colleague, just the opposite of anyone you'd feel you need to defend yourself from. And yesterday we were planning to hold a vigil in the garden, small vigil, and it turned into thousands among thousands of people. And I saw several of my students standing up in the slide on the playground watching and taking this all in, probably not fully understanding what it means. I'm grateful that it's summer, selfishly, because I don't know how to talk to them all about this, especially my little boys that look like Phil. How do I explain that to them? I don't know, but come fall, we're going to have to take them in our arms and explain, you know, that this wonderful man that they knew day to day is not coming back, and why. That's the question, right? How do I tell that to a 6-year-old? As the weeks go forward, I'm sure we'll be aware of how we're going to deal with it as a staff and how we're going to talk to our kids as a united front and let them know that this happened and tell them the truth and give them an opportunity to make a difference in the world. That, you know, they want to grow up knowing they can do anything. I don't want to have to say to them, you know, because of the way you look, you might not be able to do what you want. Mr. Phil, miss you so much, and I weep for the opportunities these children would have had because of you in the future that are now lost.
3 months after the first stop, Philando's driver's license was suspended. And this is when his first major battle with these unconstitutional traffic stops began. Police stopped him on January 8th, 2003. Then they stopped him on February 3rd, and on February 12th, and on February 26th, and on March the 4th, all in 2003. This rapid succession of stops isn't a coincidence. It's purposeful, guided targeting of an individual who fits the profile of a lot of individuals in the poor black areas of Minnesota. The police of Minnesota acted like laser-guided smart weapons, aimed directly at the black community. These weren't peace officers hired to protect and serve Philando's community. These police officers were acting as an occupying military force in the destitute communities traveled daily by Philando. These race soldiers were where he lived. Philando wasn't dealing with repeated traffic stops. Philando was dealing repeatedly with military checkpoints.
One black man pulled over more than 70 times in one jurisdiction. I kid you not, this is just insanity. Let's put up the picture of this black male in Massachusetts. He is now suing the local police department, the Worcester Police Department, for racial profiling after allegedly being pulled over more than 70 times in the past 8 years. TJ Judy says he has been suspected of stealing cars. He has been suspected of selling drugs before even being apprehended with a warrant. The report says he was pulled over in 2021 for not updating his new car color on his registration. I need you to understand how petty that is. He got his car painted, okay? He did not inform registration that his car was painted. So they went ahead and, threw the book at him. There's more. However, by law, he wasn't required to. But instead, Judah was charged with disorderly conduct and interfering with a police officer after an intense exchange. They're wrong on the law. He knows they're wrong on the law. There's an argument. Well, let's lock him up for arguing with us. How dare he?
Given the racist history of America, it should come as no surprise that every state within her walls has been touched by the filthy stench of the white supremacist philosophy. Minnesota's history of racism, in fact, is legendary.
Lynchings, they were violent and public acts of torture that traumatized black people throughout the country. It's part of America's history some would like to forget. But a memorial set to open later this month will document lynchings in America. And Minnesota's history is deeply rooted in America's history. As time drifts, the pages of history are often rewritten.
There is a reckoning taking place in America.
But Sunday, in a 60-minute story, Oprah Winfrey introduced viewers to a museum dedicated to lynching victims.
Lynchings were not just brutal footnotes in history.
And remembering sheds light on a dark chapter in Minnesota's history.
Minnesota is 166 years old and as of 2001 had a population of 5.71 million people. It became the 32nd state in the Union on May 11, 1858. To the north of Minnesota is the nation of Canada. Lake Superior and the state of Wisconsin is to the east, Iowa to the south, and North and South Dakota to the west. Diving into the racist history of Minnesota, I'm going to mention the cowardly and outright evil acts done in 1920. I'm going to show you that there is no such thing as having healthy fruits from rotten roots. Because anti-black racism eventually seeps into every aspect of American society. It's infused into the culture and almost all political decisions. On June 14, 1920, the John Robertson Circus came to the town of Duluth, Minnesota. A white couple, 18-year-old John Sullivan and 19-year-old Irene Tuscan, decided to attend the circus festivities. Having a wonderful time together, trying different foods, smoking cigarettes, drinking, and likely having premarital sex. But late that night when they were done, fear and reality hit the couple. Realizing how late in the evening they were out lollygagging around, out past their curfew, especially Irene's, she dreaded being seen by her parents and friends as a loose girl. So the two decided to concoct a story. A lie so epic it would make history and have a monument constructed from it. This lie revolved around the allegation that the couple was out so late because they had been robbed at gunpoint. And Irene, aside from being robbed, she was also raped by 6 Negroes, while her boyfriend James was forced to watch.
The images that are always so telling, I think, are of the mob storming the jail.
Melanie Adams works for the Minnesota History Center.
So I understand that it's hard to see, but you know, history is not always pleasant.
The year was 1920. The location, Duluth, Minnesota. 3 black men who worked for a circus were accused of raping a white woman.
This was essentially the accusation at that time. The young men, in not having a trial, so they were accused of this crime, not having a trial, and then a mob, which is part of the definition of being lynched, a mob actually decided to take it upon themselves to not wait for any type of trial.
Records show the 3 men were pulled from their jail cells and beaten.
The next day, on June 15th, the Duluth police chief and his officers rounded up dozens of circus workers, mostly black males, some associated with the circus, others simply for being in the area that morning. The white couple, James and Irene, subsequently picked 6 from the random lineup. At some point, either before or after the lineup, accounts differed. Irene had been examined by a doctor who determined she showed no signs of rape or forced sex of any kind. Now, this doesn't mean she was a virgin. It simply means she wasn't showing signs of vaginal injury. 5 of the 6 accused black men were Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, also Isaac McKee, William Miller, and Max Mason. The sixth accused black male name remains unknown. As word spread around town by a gentleman by the name of Louis Dondino, who organized an angry mob by driving around and telling people to join the necktie party. In a few hours, the streets surrounding the small holding jail filled with an estimated 10,000 white people, all upset and craving to see a lynching of the perpetrators before the trial even began, or charges formally pressed. Eventually, tensions boiled to a tipping point and members of the angry mob forced their way into the jail with little resistance from the stationed police officers. They were able to snatch 3 of the 6 black males. They then dragged them out to the streets and beat them with bricks, fists, sticks, and poles. Then they hung them up from the light pole at the intersection of 1st Street and 2nd Avenue.
Watched. One death certificate shows strangulation by hanging to a light pole.
Out of the 6, 3 black men were murdered, 2 black men had their cases dismissed or were acquitted, and 1 got convicted of the rape. Max Mason was sentenced to 30 years in prison but only served 4 years. He was released on the condition he would leave the state of Minnesota and not return, likely to save his life, and intimidating him not to bother filing a lawsuit.
No one wants to think about their great-great-great-grandfathers sitting at a picnic during a lynching.
Later this month, the 3 men lynched in Duluth will be part of a new monument in Alabama documenting lynchings of black men, women, and children following the Civil War.
2 years later, the KKK held its first meeting in Minnesota. In the span of 12 months, the KKK created more than 10 chapters in the state with more than 100,000 card-carrying white supremacist members. Those chapters, the great-grandchildren, and the ideology of their racist beliefs have not gone anywhere. 100 years later, in 2020, Max Mason was found innocent of the crime of rape and pardoned.
The Minnesota Board of Pardons has approved a posthumous pardon for the first time in state history. The application to pardon Max Mason was supported by many across the state in an attempt to right an injustice that took place 100 years ago.
So yeah, Minnesota history of racism runs deep. And I didn't even mention the Dred Scott trial in 1847 through 1857. When the Supreme Court's decision reiterated the nation's legalization of slavery in all U.S. territories, including Minnesota. It remained that way in the state for another year and a half until Minnesota declared statehood. But the most significant judgment by the Supreme Court was whether a black American was enslaved or free, they still could not take advantage of the privileges and protections of the U.S. Constitution afforded to whites. Seems the more things change, the more they stay the same. Immediately after the shooting, detectives interviewed Diamond, Philando's girlfriend, and Officer Yanez. There is a critical moment in each of their interviews where their accounts intersected. This happened when each witness was asked to recount the moment Philando was retrieving his wallet. Here's when Officer Yanez stated, "I was telling him, but I was telling him something as his hands went down, I think. And he put his hand around something. His hand appeared to make a C-type shape. It appeared to me that he was wrapping his hand around something with his fingers. And almost like if it were, he was putting his hands around a gun, like putting his hands around the butt of a gun."
I can't remember what I was telling him, but I was telling him something as his hand went down, I think. And he put his hand around something, and his hand made like a C-shape type shape, and it appeared to me that he was wrapping something around his fingers, and almost like if I were to put my hand around my gun, like putting my hand up to the butt of the gun. Okay. That's what it appeared to me. Okay.
Hold that paragraph in your memory, because now we're going to a specific point within Diamond's interview. Take a listen.
Okay. Right here. And he was reaching in an area you described kind of by the hip bone?
Yeah, because that's his back pocket.
Okay, so he's
his wallet was in his back pocket.
Okay, so he's reaching for what you think is his back pocket.
Right, because he had the license and registration. He keeps everything. He has a big, fat wallet. He keeps license, registration. He keeps everything in his wallet. Credit cards, money, everything in his wallet.
It's a guy thing, I get that.
I don't understand it, but he keeps it in there. And he was reaching for it, but it's so damn fat. He sags his pants. He couldn't get the thing out his thing.
So Phil's a big guy.
No, he's skinny.
Oh, okay.
He's skinny as hell. Tall.
Officer Yanez says he saw Philando's hand make a C shape as if he reached in the area of his right hip, as if he was grabbing the butt of a gun. And keep in mind, Officer Yanez not once asked Philando where the gun was. As far as he knew, the gun could have been in the glove compartment. Diamond recalled this exact same moment when Philando reached into his back pocket to retrieve his wallet, which contained his vehicle registration, license, and insurance. During her interview, Diamond mentioned Philando's wallet was fat and difficult to pull out for that reason. I'm not sure what shape Yanez would have expected Philando's hand and fingers to form in order to properly grip his wallet, besides a C shape. A triangle, maybe? The point I'm trying to make is the fact that Officer Yanez did not know where Philando's firearm was, which should have been the first question asked after Philando volunteered that information. And it is that failure to simply ask where the firearm was that led to the reckless homicide. I've never heard of a situation where a criminal disclosed to an officer they had a legal firearm only to turn and shoot the officer in the head with it seconds later. And neither had Jeronimo Yanez.